Hey guys, Brandy here with Duly Noted. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to discuss heat embossing. We're going to learn what it is and the specific powders and tools you would need in order to successfully do this technique. If that interests you, stay tuned. Please be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you can be notified each time I upload a video. If that sounds interesting to you and you're ready to go, let's get into it. So the first thing that you see here are just some basic supplies or materials that you would use for this particular heat embossing technique. We're going to go into each of these particular materials in a little more depth in a minute, but this is just a brief overview of some of my most favorite materials that I use when I heat emboss or do this particular technique. This is by no means an all-inclusive. This is just a gathering of some of my favorites and the things that I like to use. The first thing we're going to talk about is the powders themselves. So what is an embossing powder? Essentially, it is a fast-melting powder compound of some variety that can be applied to a smooth surface. In this case, ours would be paper. That is obviously what I like to apply it to. And when it is set, it creates a smooth, slightly raised surface. So the powders are very unique, and they come in a vast array of finishes. These are some of my favorites, and in fact, I need to probably whittle this down because as I've gone on, I've discovered what powders I really like, what finishes and colors I like, and I go back to again and again. This is just my whole collection of embossing powders, and in fact, not too long ago, I actually whittled them down even further. But this is just the collection I have. They come, like I said, in a variety of finishes. This one is a gold glitter, so there are ones that have glitter inside of them. And I like to put a little swatch on the outside. This just lets me know what the finished color, the finished and set embossing powder looks like. And I try to do that on a lot of them. Just to give me a better idea. There are some that are a pearlescent finish. This pearlescent finish is really difficult to capture on screen, but it is a beautiful pearlescent finish. And a lot of my powders come from Ranger. I just like their quality and the grain of them. So here I'm going to show you. The silver is from Zing. The gold is from Ranger. And it's difficult to see, but the silver has a much coarser grain than the gold. So if I was doing an image that was very detailed, I would want to go with the gold just because the grain is more fine. Now, how do you actually apply these embossing powders? You need some sort of sticky, slow drying ink. And this is just a selection of the ones that I have. If I'm going to be doing some sort of clear heat embossing, I'm probably going to use that Versamark ink pad. It is a clear sticky ink, and it applies beautifully. Now, if I wanted to do something in a white embossing powder, I would probably use this one. This is a white pigment ink from Hero Arts, and it would help cover up a lot of sins. So if I missed something in my stamping or applying the embossing powder, the fact that I used this white ink really covers up any splotchy areas or areas that were perhaps missed while I was doing my heat embossing. So that's a really good one for white. Now this one is really special. This is a distress oxide and it is actually a hybrid ink, but you are able to heat emboss with it. This comes in a beautiful rainbow of colors. I know that there are more than 60 of these colors. And if I wanted to have a specific color to whatever project I was doing, I could always stamp this down and apply clear embossing powder over it, and that would give me a embossing powder in a rainbow of colors without having to have embossing powders in all of those colors, which nobody could store. The other way to apply this ink is with a Versamark pen. So it is essentially that exact ink pad, but in a pen form. On one side there's a brush tip, and on the other side there is more of a bullet nib. So if you stamp something and you didn't quite get a line right, or maybe you have beautiful handwriting and you wanted to handwrite a sentiment, you could always use this pen and then apply your heat embossing powder over it. It's just like I said, that embossing powder, or excuse me, that clear Versamark ink in a pen format. I do not possess beautiful handwriting, but I quite often misstamp, so this is a good tool to have. We're going to get into this tool a little bit more, but this is a anti-static powder tool, and essentially it helps prevent your embossing powder from sticking absolutely everywhere. We'll go into that in more detail in a minute. Now, how do you apply a pattern or a stamped image? These are three of my favorite ways to do embossing powder. This is, again, by no means all-inclusive, just three of my favorites. One of my favorite ways is to apply it through a stencil. Just press that Versamark ink pad through the stencil. I like to do backgrounds in embossing powder, typically gold, and then sentiments, same thing, typically gold. These are just three of my favorite ways to use embossing, the embossing technique, heat embossing technique. Again, not all inclusive, but just three of my favorites. And we are going to actually heat emboss in this video just so you can see it in action, because it's one thing to talk about it and give you some information and educate you, but you don't really know how it works until you actually see it in action. So we are going to do that in this particular video. One of the other ways that one of the other tools, excuse me, that you have to have is some sort of heat gun. This isn't a heat gun from American Crafts. I've had it for a long, long time. It is by far not the Cadillac of embossing guns, but it works for me. I think when this one dies, I will probably get a Wagner heat tool. That has multiple heat settings and speed settings. Just gives you a better selection of ways to actually heat emboss. This is pretty much plug it in and go, hot and heavy. There is no like throttle on it. But like I said, it works for me, and I have found no reason to replace it. Like I said, when it dies, I will probably get something a little better quality, I suppose. So let's actually heat emboss. Let's see this technique in action. So what I have here is a clear photopolymer stamp set that is a background stamp. It is very detailed, as you can see from that packaging. All I'm going to do is set it in my Tim Holtz stamping platform. I just have a scrap piece of paper here that I'm going to apply my ink and powder to. I like to use this stamping tool, particularly when I'm using something that is very detailed or large. The reason being that I can stamp it again multiple times in the same exact spot. Because I've never used this stamp before, I'm actually conditioning it. All I do is rub my hand across it. There are stamping erasers you can purchase. Altenew has one of those. You can use like a regular white eraser, but my hand works just fine. I'm just getting the manufacturing residue off. This helps the stamp to accept the ink just a little bit better. So here's that EK Success powder tool, anti-static powder tool I was telling you about. You have to apply this because the embossing powder sticks to absolutely everything. So if there's oils or static on the paper, that embossing powder is going to stick to it. So you need some sort of tool to help you cut down on that static. Now, this EK Success powder tool is old. I've had it for a very long time. There are several new ones on the market, and I will probably get a different one when the time comes. But that just helps knock down the static on the tool, on the paper. So now I'm using that Versamark ink, and I'm going to apply a rose gold embossing powder from Ranger. It looks more brown, to be honest. It looks more brown in real life than rose gold, but it is still a pretty color. And this is more of a fall themed stamp set. So it works, it's fine. I just applied an even amount of pressure using a Stampin' Bug that I purchased off of Etsy. And this just helps me kind of save my wrists and apply even pressure all across that. I'm going to stamp this twice just because it's habit, and to quote Laura Basson, stamp it twice to make it nice. So I'm just going to apply my pressure again using that tool from Stampin' Bug. And I use a coffee filter to catch my excess embossing powder. A lot of people just use a scrap piece of paper. I use a coffee filter. They're cheap. My husband drinks coffee, so we have them on hand, and I just use those. And this helps me catch all the excess embossing powder and provides me with a funnel to put it back into its pot. So I'm going to spread my embossing powder all around and tap off the excess. And if you notice, I missed a little spot in a couple places. That is why I use that Tim Holtz stamping platform, because I can stamp it again in the same spot. I had a little excess powder, and I just used my finger to brush that off. If I was in a really tight spot, I could use a really fine dry brush and brush that away. Now, I am heat setting this. The hotter you get your tool before you bring it to the paper, the less warping you will have. I'm going to show you here. So this corner right here with this pine cone that I'm just showing you, that is actually heat set. So it's shiny, it's reflective. But this corner up here is not. Notice how it doesn't reflect the light from my ring light. It's dull and grainy. So that part is not heat set. So we need to hit that again with our heat tool until it is no longer grainy and it is shiny and smooth. That is how you know when your heat embossing powder is set. You can overheat, and you know you've overheated it when the paper looks scorched or the embossing powder is no longer raised but looks like it has actually melted into the paper. Now I went back and hit this again I stamped it again and applied embossing powder again, did the whole process all over, so I could show you kind of the beauties of that stamping platform, so I could get that corner that I actually missed. So notice how it's all shiny and none of it is grainy. It is smooth. There's a little bit of a raised surface, which allows you to do some special techniques. You can do kind of a cheater watercolor method with this, because that raised surface provides wells for the watercolor to sit. So it's good for those that are just beginners, those that want to test out watercoloring, or those that want to do a really quick background. And here I'm just trying to show you that it is raised, but it's very difficult to show in videos just how beautiful this process is. And I love watching the embossing powder melt. One of my first exposures to crafting was embossing, and I still find it beautiful today. All right, y'all, there you have it. I hope you learned something, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did learn something, please be sure to drop that in the comment section below. I'd love to know that you got some value out of this video. Like I mentioned in the video, that is not an all-inclusive list on the techniques you can do with this particular medium. It's just what I have used, what I enjoy using, and what I use successfully. So I hope you did get some value, and I hope you subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.